Okay, where it is 12:01, we are going to get started. And we are so excited that you took a moment to pause to learn some good information today. We have Stephanie Lerner with us, who is going to present, yay, from TEA. We have our Dr. Martin, Summer Martin. She's our past president with the Lone Star State. And I am Tiffany Rodriguez, the president. And we are thrilled that you are here. And I can just go on and on about Stephanie because this is our third year doing this, and it's becoming an annual event, and we are excited about it. And she always brings us so much information, so many resources. And I love it because of the fact that we all come from different groups and different districts, and we have different needs, and she covers so many of them. So thank you for being here. If you can just start dropping in the chat, let us know where you are, where are you coming from, what district are you with? Please let us know who are you, where are you coming from. I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie right now because she has a wealth of information and I do not want to take up her time. So Stephanie, it's all yours.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here. I have a lot of information for just 1 hour, so I'm going to jump right in. First of all, thank you so much for your time in attending, especially during this super busy time of the year. Back to school season is always challenging and rewarding, all kind of wrapped up at the same time. So stress, this is what we're talking about today. I will turn my PowerPoint on in just a moment so you can kind of follow along. We know that our students are feeling it. We know that we're feeling it. And so I thought for this back to school presentation, we would really look at how we can help our students alleviate their stress, how we can guide them to reduce it, looking at it through those 3 tiers, from universal all the way to intensive supports, and looking at the interventions from the lens of post-pandemic. Post-pandemic, it seems like we're finally coming to maybe the tail end of this. And so we know that that doesn't mean the stress is going to go away or be any less. So we can kind of talk about what we can do as school counselors to support. So with that, let me go ahead and share my screen. And we were having a few technical difficulties with Zoom, so hopefully all goes smoothly now. Would y'all give me a thumbs up if you can see like the big intro slide of my presentation? It should say helping students manage post-pandemic fantastic stress. All right, so let's jump in. First of all, I have for you a QR code if you want to just hold your phone up to it and click on the Qualtrics link. This QR code, what it's going to give you is a survey that you can wait till the end to fill out. But at the top of the survey is the PDF of this presentation. So I know a lot of people like to get the presentation, right at the start or even in advance. And so here it is for you. I'm going to talk about tons of different resources, and almost all of them are linked in the PDF of this presentation. So go ahead and open up that QR code. I think we also have a link to the presentation put in the chat. And if you're just joining us and you don't know how to use the QR code, then Tiffany can repost that link again. The link in the chat and the introduction QR code, it's the same document. Okay, so real quick, if you haven't met me before, I am counselor support at Texas Education Agency. And basically, if you are a school counselor in the state of Texas, I am your primary point of contact at TEA. So the best way to get in touch with me is here with my email. Questions, comments, concerns, anything you need around the topic of school counseling, feel free to reach out to me and we could set up a time to talk by phone, video chat, or just keep emailing. The main thing that I do at TEA is support districts and school counselors with the implementation of a comprehensive counseling program. And along with that, I develop school counselor resources and trainings like this one today, where we're talking about stress in school counseling, how we help students with stress. And so even though today's topic is not specifically about comprehensive counseling programs, you'll hear a little bit about how I kind of take it and put the idea of supporting students with stress back into the whole framework of a comprehensive counseling program. So I was a school counselor, in case you're wondering if I actually know what it's like. Yes, I was a school counselor, elementary and secondary. I did it for about 12 years in Central Texas, and I was in a Title I district. So student stress was something that when I was a school counselor on my campuses, we were dealing with every day and trying to help our students and support our students every day with it, even pre-pandemic. So what we're talking about today, our agenda, we're going to cover 2 objectives. We will start off kind of with this introduction. I'm going to ask you a few questions to get y'all's feedback on what you're looking to get out of it. Then we're going to jump into our first objective, which is looking at the research. What is the 2022 research saying about student mental health, student stress, and student anxiety? I think a lot of us are familiar with like some of the big CDC studies that came out a few years ago, but there's new research coming out pretty much every month on student stress because we just know there's so much of it. After that, we'll jump into our second objective. That's where we'll spend most of our time, and we will look at all kinds of different tiered interventions, resources. I'll even give you some activities, although we'll just see with time how much time we have to talk through them for tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And then we'll wrap it all up with a conclusion. This is my second time doing this particular presentation. It's the, this school year presentation. So you all are a little bit the guinea pigs. I will say that the last time I did it, it ran completely the entire hour. It's a lot of information. So I'm happy to stay on after one if anybody wants, to stay on and ask questions. And of course, you have my email. You can email me with questions. You can put questions in the chat, and we can discuss those throughout. All right. So speaking of questions, my first question for y'all, if you would put a yes or no in the chat, this just kind of gives me a little bit of feedback on what you're looking for. Do you feel like you're knowledgeable about the pandemic research relating to student stress and anxiety? So go ahead and give me a yes or no in the chat. Are you knowledgeable about like the latest and greatest pandemic research around student stress and anxiety?
Real quick, I think our chat is disabled. I'm looking in the Q&A and I'm seeing that our chat is disabled. I'm not sure if we can fix that, but if not, you can add it to the Q&A and we can go in and look at that.
Let me see. Yeah, I think Zoom maybe did some sort of an update or something the day before because we've all been kind of like, what's happening with Zoom? Let me see if I have the ability to turn on the chat.
I will say in the Q&A, there are several no's listed.
Yeah, I'm not seeing an option right now to turn on the chat. So whenever we talk about the chat, we're going to talk about it a few times throughout the presentation. Just put your answers in the Q&A or your questions or your comments. Sorry about that. Okay, second question I have for you all. Do you feel prepared to use interventions to reduce student stress and anxiety at each school counseling tier? So do you feel like you know what to do to support your students, every student on the campus with stress? Do you feel like you know what to do to support, provide targeted supports where just some students need maybe some extra stress management help? And then do you know who to refer to? Do you know how to do that at tier 3? So go ahead and give me a yes or no in the Q&A. I see the number ticking up. Let me see if I can take a look at it. Tiffany and Summer, if you guys can just let me know what you're saying in Q&A, I'm not really getting a good view of that.
most of the answers to question number 2 are no or not sure. A lot of no's, and then sometimes, yes, I feel prepared, but I'm not up to date on the latest data. I have some ideas and strategies, but would love more. Let's see. Second question, yes. At tier 1 and tier 2, yes, but not when they get to tier 3. And somebody said I can always use more training. In tier 1, probably more than tier 2 or tier 3. Somewhat prepared, first year counselor, no. Yes, but not so much at tier 3. Looking for more support with tier 2. So it seems like a lot of people are saying, I know what to do with tier 1 and maybe sometimes tier 2, but not always with tier 3. So.
Well, and we have a whole new school mental health resource database. I think some of you might be familiar with it, but it's pretty new as of May. And so that's a big tier 3 resource that we'll get into. You know, when I ask these 2 questions, I sort of figure on a lot of no's, or at least not sure's, because obviously people are here to learn about these topics. But it also gives me a good idea if people do have a lot of information that they already know, then please feel free to share that in the Q&A. You know, normally I would say chat, but if you feel like, as I'm talking about a tier 1 intervention or a tier 2 or tier 3, and you're thinking, oh, well, here's something else that I've done that really works well, feel free to put it in there so everyone can see.
Okay, Stephanie, I was able to enable the chat, so we got it working now. Yay.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, Zoom, both Summer and I were not able to log on right away, and Zoom was telling us all kinds of things that we were doing wrong. So I don't know if they did updates over the weekend or whatever, but you know, Zoom is keeping us on our toes. Okay, so jumping into the first objective, research. What is the world saying? What the United States, the CDC, the USDE, what are they all saying about how stress is affecting our kiddos, you know, just in the last couple months? So of course, I always like to start with the Center for Disease Control, CDC. They just released their Adolescent Behaviors and Experiences Survey, or the report, I guess, of the survey and the report. And what that showed is that student levels of stress and anxiety increased during the pandemic. I mean, no, that's no surprise to any of us. But it's kind of nice when we have, you know, like the data that actually says, okay, yes, what you're seeing. And if you're wondering, is it only me and my school? No, it's something that's happening across the nation. And then, you know, from 2022, we have Dr. Howery, and I don't know if I'm saying her name right, who is the principal deputy director of CDC, specifically calls out that the COVID-19 pandemic has created traumatic stressors that have potential to erode students, further erode students' mental well-being. And that just kind of shines a light on the idea that we're just getting started. The stress is not, it's not, you know, the pandemic ends and then all the stress goes away. We're in it to win it for a little while at least. The United States Department of Education, so USDE, also released their own report on supporting student mental health. This one came out last year. What their report found is that the pandemic has had a significant impact on students' mental health, and really focused on it's adding considerable stress. So, you know, we all know that the pandemic is affecting our mental health, but the stress component of it is just kind of off the charts. 70% of public schools reported that the percentage of students who have sought mental health services increased since the beginning of the pandemic. And that is a statistic that just came out. I want to say IES, the Institute of Educational Sciences, which is sort of an offshoot of USDE. They had a study that they released a few months ago, I want to say at the beginning of the summer and end of spring, and they had that 70% number, which really just made everybody kind of sit up and take notice. And then, of course, we have the American School Counselor Association. They are always ready to weigh in with the research that they're seeing, and then, of course, solutions. for different things. So they had an article called Anxiety Overload in late 2020, and it talked about high student anxiety before the pandemic that then drastically increased during the pandemic. So we know that from this article and a lot of other research studies that student stress was increasing pre-pandemic, and then we saw it, continue to increase. And feelings of social isolation and loneliness, as well as a loss of routine. So these three kind of stressors, social isolation, loneliness, and loss of routine, really have contributed the most to this increase in anxiety, student anxiety. So in terms of recommendations, ASCA really sort of pinpoints three: teach, assist, and collaborate. So teaching students coping skills, stress management strategies to reduce overall anxiety levels, assisting with school staff so that they know what to do to support their kids that are stressed out, and then collaborating with admin so that we're working with our admin to create a whole, school culture, campus culture of calm and stress reduction. And so all three of these recommendations, teaching, assisting, and collaborating, you're going to see throughout all of my different interventions and resources. You'll see lots of them. So with that, let's jump into our second objective, which is looking at tiered interventions that we can use this afternoon, tomorrow, next week, next month with our students. Just what can we be doing right now to help them with their stress and anxiety? So I like to start off with the MTSS framework. I think a lot of you are familiar with it by now, but if you're not, you have this screen to kind of overwhelm you. It's a lot of text on one screen, but I wanted to give you a slide that really summed up a multi-tiered system of supports so that if you want to come back to it and use it in the future, it'll all be here for you clear. So MTSS is an educational framework, evidence-based, and it provides tiered interventions to improve learning and functioning for all students. So that's what it is in a nutshell. In terms of why and how we're using it in Texas, it went into statute in 2019, and that's kind of the orange part at the top that says it's important to have a systemic and coordinated multi-tiered support system that addresses climate, social, emotional, and behavioral and mental health. So when that was added to Texas Education Code, the law in 2019, then we all of a sudden started seeing a lot more about MTSS coming out of Texas Education Agency, coming out of, coming out all around the state, even though MTSS has been very much embraced nationally, I want to say for like the last 15 years or so. Texas is a little bit newer with getting into it. So in terms of school counseling, what does MTSS look like in the school counseling world? Well, tier one, so down here at the bottom, is where we have our universal instruction or universal supports. Usually looks like guidance lessons, usually looks like some kind of school-wide activity where every child is involved. And then moving on to tier two, that's our targeted section of MTSS. And in school counseling, for us as school counselors, it usually looks like small group and individual counseling. And yes, we put those both together at tier two. Consulting and collaborating happens at every tier, but I really called it out in tier two because that's where it kind of takes off, I feel like. And then we have tier three, which is our intensive supports. And typically as school counselors, we are providing indirect services at tier three. So we're not doing much in the way of direct services. That's happening at tier one and two. At tier three, we're doing giving referrals, collaborating with community partners, consulting with families, that sort of thing. One book that I want to give a shout out to, MTSS, Making MTSS Work. This is an ASCA publication. And if MTSS is something you're interested in and you want more resources, you want more documents, just everything MTSS that you would need, you can find it in this book. This book is also in my references at the end of this presentation. So if you need a link you can look at the references, but just a great book that's chock full of everything MTSS, as it relates to what we do in school counseling. So let's take a look at stress management interventions at each tier. And we'll start with tier 1. I'm just kind of keeping a good eye on my time here. So all students' mental health is supported at tier 1 at the universal level. So, and we can think of it like the way that we would think of academics. Every child gets a math class in a school. Doesn't matter what type of math class it is or what their level is, we're providing math to every child. So the same way every kiddo gets a math class at tier 1, every kiddo should be getting a counseling and guidance instruction at tier 1. And what that looks like depends on your campus reality. Hopefully with the recent legislation, we're seeing more and more counselors able to reach their students at tier 1. But, I always give the example of if you've never done a guidance lesson before in your life and you do one spring guidance lesson and one fall guidance lesson this year, that's progress. So, at tier 1, more is more. That's where we want to be spending most of our time as counselors, but we, all have our campus reality that we're functioning in. So some interventions at this tier. I think first and foremost, normalizing that stress is a common human condition, especially now. And the idea behind that is it reduces stigma. We don't want somebody walking around having panic attacks thinking that they can't ever tell anybody about it because they're feeling ashamed or they're, am I crazy? Is there something wrong with me? This reaction that we're all having to the decade of 2020 is so normal. And the more we can teach our students that in guidance lessons and then how to get help for that, the better off they are. Second bullet, assist with school-wide mental health practices, focusing on behavior and emotional regulation. I'm just going to move my screen around a little bit so I can see what y'all are seeing. And explore self-referral process, which we're going to talk a little bit about right here on this activity when we get to the next slide. So explore the self-referral process and stress management strategies in every guidance lesson. So in terms of stress management strategies in every guidance lesson, you might be thinking, well, where are those? Where are those guidance lessons? What does that look like? And so that's where we get into some of our resources down here. Of course, our Texas model, which I'm always talking about, looks like this. If you don't have the Texas model, go ahead and download it for free right here. Section 5 of the Texas model is basically our scope and sequence of objectives. I like to call them objectives because I'm old school, but I think they're called competencies and indicators actually in the Texas model. And Section 5 has many different stress management indicators for student mastery. So you can use Section 5 as objectives for your guidance lessons with students and pick out, the ones that are related to stress management. Second bullet under resources is TEA has stress management guidance lesson curricula. If you go to this link, best practice resources, and basically that best practice resources, it takes you to a TEA webpage. If you go to the middle of the webpage, you'll see where it says best practice resources. And there's tons and tons of different resources on that page that have been vetted, looked at by TEA, such as Second Step, COPE. What's another one that I was just looking at the other day? Quavercell, if it's not up there, is going up. Lessons in character. There's just lots of different ones. And I know the agency, as well as some of the other agencies like Health and Human Services, is right now in the process of reviewing and adding and kind of streamlining a little bit that best practice resources page. So keep an eye on that. It's already up and it's great, but it's going to get a lot better as we work on it. The third bullet, if you want to kind of step outside of what's happening in Texas, the CDC webpage at this link has a really great kind of one pager on healthy coping tools for kids. So I like to use that one. And then also the American Psychological Association has a webpage on healthy coping tools that's sort of meant for adults and children, but definitely something we can use for our older kiddos. And when we get into talking about this activity, which is the next slide, I use coping mini lesson strategies either from that CDC webpage or the American Psychological Association webpage. So I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Before I jump down into all the steps of this activity, let's talk a little bit about what a tier 1 activity would look like. We want to regularly educate our students on how to refer themselves for urgent and non-urgent help. Urgent being, 3 hurts emergency, hurt yourself, hurt somebody else, somebody's going to hurt you. So that's where, there's an emergency, they're in crisis. But also how to refer themselves for non-urgent help. If they're just feeling stressed, but nobody's getting hurt and they want help right now, what does that referral system look like? Whether it's electronic, whether it's a form, and we want our kids to hear from us repeatedly over and over again, how to refer themselves for any kind of stress or other, mental health need they might have and how that can get routed through the school counselor. What we know is that when students have knowledge on how to get help, on coping skills for reducing stressors, and just on who their school counselor is, who that person is, how to get to them, their protection from stressors increases. And that's really what we're going for here. We're not going to get rid of stress. Like I said, the decade of 2020 it is what it is. But the more protection we can give kids from stressors, the more we can teach them how to handle and get help for their stress, the less stressed they are, the better off they are. So some activity steps for this idea of how do you teach self-referral and teach a quick coping mini lesson in every guidance lesson. Well, begin your guidance lesson with reminders. Have them review what the 3 hurts are: hurt yourself, hurt somebody else, somebody's going to hurt you. How to self-refer, what does it look like? What form do they fill out if they don't have an emergency? And how do they get to you right away if they do have an emergency? And it's also really important in this sort of reminders period that you always talk a little bit about school staff as mandated reporters. And why? We're not mandated reporters because we want to tell their secrets to people. We're mandated reporters because 1, it's the law, and 2, we want to keep them safe. And sometimes we can't keep students safe if we don't tell anybody else what's going on. So just kind of having a real brief conversation about that. Next activity step, explain that practicing healthy coping skills helps us handle our problems before they get to crisis level. The more work we can do when the problems are minor with healthy coping skills, the less chance they get to that crisis level. And so at that point, teach the class a 5 to 10 minute coping mini lesson. And again, you can use the one from the CDC webpage, the American Psychological Association webpage, or if you just have your own, healthy coping skills, resiliency building skills, stress management skills that you want to use, feel free to come up with your own. One that, let me look at my time. I'm already getting low on my time, but I do want to real quickly go through this passive muscle relaxation exercise with you. It's so neat. It's very, very simple, kind of common sense, but we are always hearing about progressive muscle relaxation, and you're probably familiar. Progressive muscle relaxation, that's where we're clenching and releasing, clenching and relaxing. And so some experts are saying now, we don't need to do any of the tensing and the clenching because it's the decade of 2020. We're all stressed and we're all tensed up all the time anyway. So instead, they're kind of advocating for passive muscle relaxation, which is basically where all you're doing is the relaxation piece. You're not doing the tensing up. So I'm going to lead you through a very brief passive muscle relaxation exercise. And what I'm going to take you through now, that would be the exact same thing you would do with your students. Whether they're elementary, whether they're high school, doesn't matter. This works for any age. All right. So with passive muscle relaxation, generally therapists say that it's best to start at the lower body and then kind of work your way up. So you want to pick a muscle group, and we'll start with our calves, let's say. So imagine, get yourself seated in a comfortable position. You're probably already there, but if not, get comfortable. Hopefully everybody can do this right along with me. And breathe in through your nose, 5 seconds. And then as you're breathing out through your mouth, just imagine your calves relaxing. And then again, in through your nose. And as you breathe out, again, just imagine those calf muscles relaxing. And then we can move up to like our knees, let's say, the muscles around our knees. So in through your nose, and imagine those knees, just all the muscles in your knees just relaxing as you breathe out. And again, in through your nose, and imagine all the muscles around your kneecaps just relaxing. And then maybe you move up to your thighs. And so in through your nose, and imagine your thigh muscles just relaxing. And so you could do that with students for 5 minutes, or you could turn it into a whole 45, 50-minute activity, just depending on how far you wanted to take it. Of course, with any tier 1 activity, or really any tier 1 or tier 2 activity, you want to make sure that you get that last bullet in, which is some processing time to discuss how students could use the activity in their real world. You know, it's one thing to work on passive muscle relaxation as we're sitting at our desks or while you're there with them in a guidance lesson, but what do they do? How do they do it in the middle of a math test? How do they do that coping strategy, whichever one you're teaching them, when they're listening to their parents argue, you know, downstairs, and they're upstairs in their bedroom and they hear yelling because, you know, mom's lost her job as a result of economic issues that are going on, and now the parents are arguing about it. So always important to have that processing discussion. So at this point, I'm going to jump into tier 2 and talk about what we can do for students that need additional targeted supports. And so I'll go back to my example of the math class again. So, you know, tier 1, every kiddo gets a math class, right? Well, some students, that one math class for that day wasn't enough, and they need maybe to come after school and get some math tutoring, or they need a small group. It works the same way in counseling. If we do one stress management fall guidance lesson and one stress management spring, most of our kids are going to be taken care of. They're going to have coping strategies that they need. But you're going to have 10 to 20% that need more. And so what we do at tier 2, we increase frequency, we increase intensity. We might be teaching them the same exact stress management strategies, but instead of once a semester in a group of 30 students in the class, now we're teaching it 6 to 8 times in a group with 5 other students there. So what are some stress management interventions at tier 2? Evidence-based small group interventions that focus on additional skill building around stress management. And I'm going to jump down to my resources. I'm pointing at my screen like y'all can see what I'm pointing to. Let me see actually if it lets me put a little pointer on, because I'm going to start pointing out a whole bunch of things. So I'm jumping down to this first bullet here for resources. If running a small group is something that you're interested in and you need a really kind of comprehensive, helpful resource, this is one that I wrote for TEA a couple years ago. It's a stress management group counseling guide. And it's not just, it doesn't just have the content about how to run stress management strategies in group. It tells you how to set up a group. It tells you how to use data to evaluate your group, how to work with your admin, just everything around group you can find in this little PDF. So that is linked for you right there. Going back up to interventions, the second bullet, work with community mental health professionals as a partner in Tier 2 planning. If you jump down to the second bullet under resources, TEA's school mental health webpage, which I printed out and put in a binder, even though I don't recommend that because we're constantly updating our school mental health webpage with other agencies around the state. But I like to have my paper copy. What I've linked to in this particular bullet here is the page that talks about how school counselors can work together with community partners to kind of share and divide and conquer Tier 2 interventions. So if you go to that second bullet link here, you'll find specifically the community partner piece, but you can then go around and look throughout the webpage at all the school mental health resources in there. And then the last one I have here, the last intervention bullet, offer short-term solution-focused individual counseling. And a resource that I really like for that is the missing manual. This is in your presentation as you go on into like the reads and resources slide, so you don't have to write it down. It's already in the presentation. But this book is solution-focused brief counseling specifically written for school counselors. How do school counselors use this in one-to-one sessions with students, short-term individual counseling? Also, the missing manual has information on solution-focused group counseling and solution-focused parent conferences. Solution-focused everything. But a big chunk of it does focus on individual counseling. So I wanted to give that a shout out as a good resource for that intervention. And then, of course, I always bring it back to our Texas model. Pages 57 to 67 in our model gives guidance on how to analyze school data to determine who needs the targeted supports. And, that's a whole full day presentation in itself. And I actually have a presentation called, data for school counselors. So I'm just going to make a quick mention of it here is if you go to these pages in the Texas model, it really clearly leads you through how to use data to sort of figure out which kiddos need more targeted supports. Okay, so with that, activity 2 example is career conversations. This is actually an ASCA resource. Looks like this, and I'm so excited about it. As you can see, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about why am I showing you this career conversations resource and how does it relate to Tier 2? So the idea of leaving K-12 schooling for college or career can cause students anxiety, especially in this decade when leaving 11th grade, leaving 12th grade and going on to a career in the military, a career, a community college experience, a four-year university, trade school, whatever, might look so different. It might be something that nobody can really imagine what it looks like. And so because of that, it's helpful sometimes just to have a student support group on CCMR, or have a stress management student support group that focuses on if you're nervous about what comes after high school. And so you can use ASCA's career conversations for this in both a group setting, individual setting, basically some kind of quick steps on how you would do that in a group or individually. Ask the student what aspect of post-secondary college or career is most worrisome to them. So you're starting off with getting them talking about that. Use the questions and prompts here to maybe start every group session or every individual session with a 5 or 10 minute discussion about what they're worried about and, what are some solutions for it. So for example, if I turn on the back of the career conversations page, and you have it linked right here, so you can take a look at it too. On the back, it says, here's one of their prompts. You will likely experience personal and academic challenges while in your university, college program, class, whatever. They're giving a lot of different options. Who might you turn to for support? during challenging times. And so then just kind of exploring that prompt for 5 or 10 minutes with group members can alleviate a lot of anxiety. Alternately, if you want to really jazz it up, you could bring in a guest speaker, you could bring in a college student, you could bring in a career professional who can provide kind of some like real lived experiences on responses to these prompt questions. So you could kind of have them do a Q&A with your group members. And then, of course, just like in our tier 1, we want to make sure that we process the activity with students. And just one way I think of processing this kind of an activity would be with that quote, knowledge is power. And how does that relate to college or career related anxiety? The more we know about it, the more power we have over controlling our anxiety with it, and just kind of knowing that maybe it's not as scary or worrisome as we thought it might be. Okay, so jumping into tier 3, check my time. Okay, I'm doing good. I was getting a little behind, but now I'm all caught back up again. So tier 3 is where we are typically referring students out. If you think of the tier 2, let's say you did a group on, a student support group on stress management. After you're finished your group, most of your kids in that group are taken care of. They're still going to have stress, but they have a lot of tools and they've had a lot of practice with you on using their stress management tools. But when you get up to tier 3, you're still going to have that 1 to 2%. Typically, that's how it shakes out of the population, the campus population, that even with all the tier 1 and tier 2 support you provided and the school provided, they're still struggling, really struggling with their stress and anxiety. And so what we want to do in terms of interventions there is provide indirect service interventions in the form of stress management referrals to, community resources. It might be a therapist, pediatrician, a mentor program, but something where those kiddos can get more support, more intense, more frequent. So, instead of just a guidance lesson on stress, maybe they're having a once a week or twice a month individual 60-minute session with a therapist on stress management. And again, probably the same strategies that therapist is doing, the same strategies with your kiddos as you are in guidance lessons. It's just intensity and frequency has changed. So where do you get these indirect referrals from? TEA's mental health resource database. So I feel like sometimes this is where I go into the weeds, because I could talk for 45 minutes just about this database. It's so massive. It's kind of an electronic version of that piece of paper that we all used to, or maybe still do give out, that has the referrals of who you can go to in the community to get, therapy or clinics or pediatricians. So it's all TEA as well as other agencies have put it all into this mental health resource database. So I've linked it for you here. Rather than me explaining all of it, it's just good to kind of go in there and play with it. My pro tip, though, for using this mental health resource database is use the advanced filters. I was playing around with it about right when it came out. So I want to say maybe 2 months ago. And I was really overwhelmed until I used the advanced filters. Like, I was getting hundreds and hundreds of hits for resources. Well, we don't give out a resource list of 300, therapists. And when you use the advanced filters, it really kind of narrows those resources down for your particular town or city or region or campus, area. So that's really helpful. The second stress management intervention at tier 3, follow up on referrals to community partners. This is really important. We don't want to refer a child out for some sort of intensive stress management support and then never check in with them again, never talk to them about it again. So I've linked here for you another training that I do on crisis prevention and intervention. And slide 31 of this training that's linked right here, slide 31 has a protocol, like a checklist of how to check in with students And then you could use that, as well for staff, parents, or community partners, so that you're able to kind of connect what's going on outside of the school with, or maybe inside the school, if it's a school-based tier 3 support, with, just what's happening every day in that child's kind of school experience. Last bullet on this page, let me see, did I talk about this one? No. Texas model consultation and coordination domains. If you look on page 25 of the Texas model, or if you look on the system support section, pages 101 to 115, have guidance specific to how school counselors collaborate with community partners on intensive student supports. Again, we are not providing any or most of the direct services at tier 3. So we have to know how to work with our community partners, or our school-based partners, if you have a school-based social worker that works in your school. And there's a lot of support on that if you need it in the Texas model at those pages. So just some different things there. I am actually, for the sake of time and just to kind of be able to get into the chat, look at some of the questions and kind of start wrapping this up in the next 10 minutes. I am actually going to skip this activity. I'm not going to talk about it. Except to say that it's here. So if you want a tier 3 activity, if you want to kind of get an idea of how do you do those transition meetings with students when they're coming back from DAEP, when they're coming back from a mental health hospitalization back into the school, how do you transition like that? I have a whole activity around that here for you. And it comes with a student support plan that you can click on that link and you'll get that. So that's here for you if you need a tier 3 activity. One thing I want to mention, this is page 95 of the Texas model, and it is so important and it's so often overlooked because it's just page 95 of the Texas model, unless you're somebody that's taking this home and reading it page to page, you might miss this. We have to minimize our interruptions during our direct work with students. Direct work with students being tier 1 and tier 2. And I know that's hard. I myself remember the days of being a school counselor and being constantly interrupted as I'm trying to do a guidance lesson because somebody's in crisis or somebody needs something. So I'm just going to read to you a couple of those sentences on page 95. Remember, the Texas model is in statute. So this is all aligned with the law now. It says that crisis responses, so that's typically our tier 3, always take priority. However, very big however there, if a school counselor is providing guidance lessons, facilitating a group, or meeting with a student, the campus has in place a response plan to monitor a student in crisis until the school counselor is available. That is so crucial. That if there's a child in crisis, there's a whole school team where other adults can supervise that child in crisis for the 20 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever it takes for you to finish your direct work with, the class, because we never decrease our crisis and we never support students in decreasing their tier 3 needs if we're constantly interrupted from our tier 1 and our tier 2 supports. So just wanted to kind of give that a shout out that that's in the Texas model, codified into, law. And we're going to see this being important now more than ever, because we're seeing our crisis needs of our students kind of go off the charts. And one person handling all the crisis for a school is just not sustainable. It was never best practice. It never should have been like that. But I know when I was a school counselor, myself and my co-counselors often were the only people that were handling crisis. And it's just, we can't do that anymore, not with the amount of crisis we're seeing nowadays. So wanted to make mention of that. All right. So if you would take a moment to kind of just reflect a little bit on some of the different things that some of the different information I've given you, and let me know. You can either unmute, although we do have almost 200 people in here, so we probably won't do a lot of unmuting. Maybe just put your idea in the chat. At which tier is stress management most needed at your school? Is it the tier 1 where you just really need to get in there and work with all kiddos? Is it more of the targeted supports, or is it kind of fleshing out your tier 3 indirect services? Where is it most needed at your school? And if you want to answer why, I would love to hear that too. But go ahead and give me a 1, 2, or 3 in the chat. And Tiffany and Summer, if y'all don't mind just letting me know what you're seeing. I'm not sure I can see everything the same as y'all can.
It's kind of a mix, but I'm seeing a lot of tier 2. Is that what you're seeing, Tiffany?
Okay, I actually can see it a little bit right now. Yes, I'm seeing the same, a lot of tier 2s. Some 1s also. Just kind of looking at these answers. And I really like to see those tier 1s that are still popping up, because that's where we want to spend most of our time with our kids, is tier 1. So if you're finding like, I need to do the most work at tier 1, great. That's where we want to spend a lot of our time. Although tier 2, I think, is kind of the more common response, because like Summer and Tiffany were saying at the beginning, a lot of us have our tier 1 down, and it's just a matter of now, how do we provide the targeted supports? And that's maybe where our kids are struggling so much as we, go through this very unusual time. So great, let me take one more look at the chat. And I love people calling out to other people and sharing ideas. Great stuff. Fantastic. Keep those answers coming if you haven't had a chance to put yours in the chat yet. This slide I am not really going to talk about, because I have shared it before. Actually, when I did my back to school presentation for y'all last year, this exact slide was in it. But I do want to kind of shout out a new resource. It's actually not new, but it's new to me. And just mention again that our role as school counselors is primarily to students. So we are not counseling staff members. That's not what we do. But there's definitely a place for us to assist our admin in supporting staff wellness. And so that's what this MTSS triangle addresses. And in the chat is a CDC resource that is fantastic on staff and educator wellness. And there's even a little YouTube video within that CDC webpage in that link that you can kind of click on, and it would be just a great video to show your staff, kind of related to staff wellness. All right, so we are at kind of the end of our presentation, and I want to, first of all, pause for about a minute and let you all fill in the survey. So this is the same survey that you opened up at the beginning of the presentation. If you haven't opened it up yet, please do so right now. You can either use the QR code to open it, or you can use the link. I think Tiffany provided a link in the chat earlier. Here's why the survey is so important, and go ahead and feel free to open it up and start filling it in right now. Here's why it's important, because a couple of the questions in the survey specifically ask you, what are your counseling needs on your campus, in your district, in your region? And I use that as my data to take back to my bosses at TEA, so that we're creating resources and training and information that specifically gets at what y'all need. In fact, this training that I'm doing today is because last year's back to school presentation, the big theme was stress management. And then of course it went on for the whole rest of the year. I heard all year in my surveys how counselors needed stress management interventions, resources, and ideas for students, because everybody was struggling so much with stress. So as a result, we have this presentation. So I'll give you about a minute or so to finish up the survey. It's really fast. It's only about 7 questions. And we'll go to the next slide in about a half a minute. Okay, so if you're still filling in the survey, take your time, keep filling it in. I never like people to wait and fill out the survey after the presentation because then I get like 3 filled out. And I really do want to have your input as we move forward into the school year. I'm going to continue on with just a couple quick wrap up things, but you know, if you want to just listen with half an ear as you're trying to finish up the survey, that's totally doable. So quick review, we talked today in this fast and furious hour on the recent research on stress management and kind of the student stressors that we're seeing. We talked about various tiered interventions, resources, and activities for stress management, and there's more. This presentation that I just did is actually just a 1-hour overview of a 3-hour stress management and school counseling presentation that I have. It is going through the final levels of approval here at TEA, but it'll be ready any day. So if you're thinking, well, I like this material, but I need a lot more. I need more on stress management. Email me. I'm happy to send you the PDF of the full stress management training as soon as it's ready. Or if you have, you know, if you're in a district with 25 or more participants, I'm happy to come in and, you know, you can Zoom me in to do the 3-hour training, just as long as you have 25 or more people. Some additional stress management resources. This is where I mentioned the missing manual. Also, that mental health guide, the whole webpage on school mental health is up here, as well as Project Restore, which I've talked about, you know, in previous years, still excellent, and just some other good stress management resources. And school counselor program resources, I've given you a slide so that you have the ability to kind of check out any of these PDFs or trainings around kind of the big school counselor trainings that we have at TEA that are sort of like the most popular. And there's actually 4. These are the ones that I think are most helpful to school counselors. Texas Model Training Overview. There's also a materials checklist, like what are the steps to having a comprehensive counseling program and an example. Data in school counseling, I mentioned that one earlier on in the presentation. If you want like a full training on how to show that your 80% or more is spent or not spent on school counseling, and a lot of resources around that, that's the data in school counseling. Mental health wellness guidance lessons, that is a whole training on tier 1 school counseling supports. So specifically, how do we support our students' mental health wellness at tier 1 in guidance lessons? And I talk a lot in this tier 1 presentation, as well as the tier 2 student support group, about how to work with your administration to make that happen if you are so bogged down with non-counseling duties that you can't even get to tier 1 supports. And so here's our tier 2 student support group training. And also this is the group counseling guide that I already gave y'all, as well as some others. And I do want to just give a shout out to our counseling, advising, and student supports webpage and newsletter. We are trying to get out a summer newsletter that I think is very much going to become a summer/fall newsletter. And the webpage, I'm working right now with the team on a whole new set of 22-23 updates to the school counselor webpage. So look for those in the next couple weeks and months as well. And that is basically it for me, right at 1 o'clock. So we went right up to the time. I do want to mention one other resource that was in the chat, and that's Ask Us Back to School webpage. Just fantastic resources there if you're looking for sort of back to school counseling resources. And so with that, I am happy to stay on. I know we're at like 1:01 and probably lots of people have to jump off and go. So I'm going to turn it back over to Tiffany and Summer. But I'm happy to stay on if people have questions, and we could go through the questions in the chat and all of those things.
I think one of the big questions is, are they going to get a copy of this, which you definitely will. get a copy of this. And the book that everybody was talking about is the Solution Focused School Counseling, the Missing Manual, which you can get on Amazon. So there it is.
Yeah, so the missing manual is also linked in this presentation. You can find it in here. And y'all already have a copy of the PDF of this presentation because it's in a QR code at the beginning and the end. But I know LASCA also puts it up on their site. And so you'll be able to see, oh, the recording of it. Yeah. So you don't have a link to the recording yet, but of course, LASCA will provide that.
Yes, we'll make sure you get a recording of it. Okay, well, Stephanie, we appreciate you. Thank you so much for these great resources. It's a wealth of information. And we just had a teacher to reach out to us to do a stress management presentation for one of her classes. So we're excited to receive. It was very timely for me. I can speak on that end. But are there any other questions in the chat? I think it was one question that I saw, Stephanie, which was the counseling protocol link.
Yeah. Oh, yes, because that, okay. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. Yep. I know exactly what the question is on that. So I get really motivated sometimes in the middle of the night and I make like updates on my presentations and then sometimes don't always save that to PDF. You have the counseling protocol link in your school counselor program resources. It is right.
This presentation in the chat one last time. I think there were some people who started late who are looking for it.
I can do that right now.
Thanks, Stephanie.
So somebody was asking about the like counseling crisis protocol, sort of follow-up, check-in. If you go, which is linked in mine that I see, but not linked in your PDF. So you can find it here. It actually is in the crisis intervention and prevention training. You have this in your version. And if you go to slide 31 of this training, you'll see the checklist for like, what do you do? What do you talk about with the student who's transitioning back from like a tier 3 intervention back to school, and you want to check in with them. So thank you so much for that question. And actually now I'm realizing that the missing manual, Summer, I know why they're asking you this. The missing manual is not linked in your copy of the presentation. It's linked in my copy. But like Summer said, you can go right to Amazon, type in the missing manual, Google search. It's one of the first things that comes up. So sorry about that. Yeah, it's amazing how well people pay attention, because I think you guys caught my glitches for sure. So I definitely appreciate that. Other questions or comments that y'all are seeing in the chat?
Tiffany, I think what you've linked in there is just the survey.
Okay, let me go back.
Because that goes to Qualtrics. And then there is a last question on there that is a specific checklist. Do you recommend the Columbia suicide checklist or any other checklist?
So what I would say I would really encourage you to look at ASCA's position statement and ASCA's sort of best practice around screeners and assessments. There's a sentence that always pops into my head from ASCA, which is, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but it's something like suicide assessments and screeners are faulty at best, dangerous at worst, and so ASCA gives a lot of insight into that and talks about a lot of research. And that's really where I look to kind of see, what the trends are and what is best practice. And I don't know, Summer or Tiffany, if you guys have possibly a link to drop in. If not, email me and I'm happy to send you their position statement and some of their resources around school counselors and suicide risk assessment.
That's it.
All right. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything else pop up. Probably there's some sort of question that we missed. And if that's the case, they can always email me and I'm happy to respond that way.
Yes. Well, thank you all for joining us for your lunch. I know it was We went a little bit over, so thank you so much for your time. And like Stephanie said, reach out to her, reach out to Alaska. We're here to serve you. We're here, our board of directors we're all volunteers, and we just love the profession of school counseling. So reach out to us. We're here to help. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Stay well. Stay safe,
Have a
everybody.
great afternoon, everybody.
Bye. Wow.
Okay, that was
That's some good stuff.
so much information.
Yeah.
I know it's
It
too
is
much
so
for an
much
hour,
information.
but
I can take a slide a day just to go.
there's just so much out there. And I always think, do I keep some of it off? And
No, keep it all so we can choose.
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
It's so
People
good.
can
It's
always,
so good and they
So
love it. They
good.
just need to go and digest it.
Yes.
Yeah,
Now we
absolutely.
gave it to them. Now
Yeah.
they go and digest it, and then they can come back and ask you questions and all that great stuff.
Yeah, and it's sort of like a year long. I mean, everything, there's MTSS, there's all the tiers there, so it
Morning,
can.
Jackson. And y'all, I'm gonna have to go. I'm late for meetings.
Okay. Thank you. It was wonderful. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you. Have a wonderful week,
You
ladies.
too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.